Welcome or welcome back. I'm the Ink Archivist looking at Diamine's 2022 Green Edition Inkvent Calendar, and today we have Day 10, Dusted Truffle. We're finally in the double digits, so we're celebrating with the return to shimmer, and this is kind of the cool-toned brown to Yule Log's warm-toned brown. And since this is a brown like Yule Log, we are pulling out the Sailor Pro Gear Slim White Russian again. This has a fine nib. Most of mine have an extra fine, but this is different. And then shaking that up to get that glitter in there. And then we'll be filling this pen up. I was actually surprised. This ink handled in a fine Sailor a lot better than the Yule Log did. I'm not quite sure why, but something in the property of the ink maybe was just a little wetter. After I was inking this pen and when I was swabbing it, I noticed that there was some pretty cool teal on the paper towel I was using, so I thought this would be a cool ink to do a little amateur chromatography with. So here I have some coffee filter paper that I've put the ink on, and the components and resulting complexity of this ink are pretty cool to witness. So now we'll move on to our usual ink swabbing. So I have Tomoe River, HP 32, Rhodia, and Apica. Now I'll be honest, I didn't have high expectations for this ink at first blush. I thought based on the packaging and my initial playing around with this ink that it wasn't really going to suit my tastes. But after using it for a while in my White Russian and doing these swabs and such, I've really come to like and appreciate this ink quite a bit. Now you'll see as I'm laying down this ink, it almost has kind of a greenish tinge as it's still wet. I think that's probably because of like the cool blue and that kind of red brown that you saw in the chromatography mixed to create this kind of greenish look, but it doesn't stick around after it dries. It's definitely not olive in any sense of the word. But you do get some depth to the color, and of course this is most apparent on the Tomoe River paper. As you can see, it has that lovely spot in the middle where you get a more reddish, warm-toned brown there, whereas the rest are definitely more one solid tone. And you can see this doesn't really get washed out on any of the less fountain pen friendly papers, and I found the properties on each to be very well behaved. Not a lot of notable bleed through, showed through feathering, as you would probably expect. Not a big shader though either, so if you're interested in shading, not sure this is really gonna get you what you want. But one thing I found particularly interesting is that this ink really shone on the Apica paper, which often I find is usually not displaying the properties of your ink to the fullest, but you can see you really get a lot of different colors showing up, and it's quite gorgeous. As I alluded to earlier, I found this ink to be slightly better behaved than Yule Log in my pens. Not exactly sure what's accounting for that or why that is, but definitely a positive. So on to the notes that I took with this pen, and this is a Tomoe River notebook. I think this is quite readable, about a 7.5 out of 10. It's a brown, but it's not super dark for one, so I think most people will find it okay, but not everyone. And so now we'll dive into the writing samples and comparisons with this ink, and I'm starting with a Hokuro with a 2.0 nib. And I'll be doing the sample sentence, "The quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog," with the fine Hokuro nib. Now, in case you're new to the whole Diamine Inkvent craze, they usually release the full bottles of ink later in the year, so they usually come out with these calendars in October. Obviously, you're supposed to use them in December, and then the full bottles come out. Apparently, they came out last year in April, so I've read that the Cult Pens announcement for it came April 1st, so we might be just a few short days away or weeks away from an announcement or the release of the full bottles. So that's why I still thought it would be helpful to go through all of these inks, even though obviously I'm behind the 8 ball. It's not December or anything anymore, but you can still get a hold of these if you want any of them, so it was worth my while, I thought. So I thought I would get 3 or 5 when they did come out, whichever ones were my favorite, so we'll see. I'm not in any rush. Obviously I still have quite a lot of all of this ink. But now I'm working on the comparisons here, so I'm starting with Dusted Truffle, of course, to get that comparison down. Now after I finish this up, I'll be moving on to Yule Log, which of course is an apt comparison since it's another Diamine Inkvent brown with glitter in it, so I thought it would be helpful, but it's not like Dusted Truffle really at all. Kind of like I said before, it's the warm tone brown to Dusted Truffle's cool tone brown. Still a very lovely ink though. So wrapping that up, I'll move on to yet another Diamine brown ink, this time chocolate brown. Doesn't have the glitter, doesn't have the pizzazz, but it's an old standard. This color is very rich, dark, and readable compared to the other two. Definitely less showy, but definitely more appropriate for some situations. Now we have Iroshizuku Tsukushi, which I talked about in depth in another video on Iroshizuku inks if this one strikes your fancy or if you happen to miss that one. Quite similar to chocolate brown, I'd say. A little bit more warm than that color, but still kind of a darker, not so shiny ink. And that about wraps up our conclusion, so here's the last look, and then we'll move on to the finished ink sample swabs. I've got to say it's so satisfying to see those pools of silver shimmer on each of these. It's so pretty. And I actually like this color just flat out better than Yule Log, which again, I didn't even think I would like this ink at all, so I was quite surprised. And this has won out over that ink. We'll see who ends up on top in the end, but quite like this a lot. And I am short on brown inks around here, so you know, another interesting contender. But let me know what you think about Dusted Truffle. Seems like a pretty popular color, and I'd love to hear your opinions on it. I hope this was helpful, and thank you for joining me today. Have a good one. Bye.